Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's forum. The title of today's forum is Crying Out But No One Listens, Overcoming the Pandemic Sadness from the Behavioral Sciences Perspective. I'm your guest speaker for today. I'm Dr. Dave Elijah Kicho Dada, a licensed medical doctor and a graduate of the Behavioral Sciences degree program of the University of the Philippines, Manila. I would like to thank University of the Philippines, Cebu, College of Social Sciences, Master of Education program for giving me this opportunity to share valuable information and insights about this very important and timely topic of today's pandemic. Let me start by showing to you what behavioral sciences would look like. Behavioral sciences encompass three different disciplines, namely psychology, sociology, and anthropology. We use these three different disciplines in order to understand the behavior of a person. We're not satisfied to just understand and look of a person individually, but we wanted to understand the society as well as the culture of the person. And for today's forum, we're going to understand depression on the lens of psychology, sociology, as well as anthropology. For the outline of the discussion, we're going to show to you the models and theories of sadness, the prevention of suicidal behaviors due to pandemic sadness, the causes and remedies of pandemic sadness. Let's start with the models and theories. The first perspective that we're going to discuss is the psychological perspective. And first is the psychoanalytic theory of depression by Sigmund Freud. Freud is also a medical doctor, and he argued that some cases of depression could be linked to loss or rejection by a parent. From the Freudian perspective, depression is like grief in that it often occurs as a reaction to the loss of an important relationship. So that relationship could be a significant other like your spouse or maybe your girlfriend or your boyfriend. That important relationship could be your parent, your siblings, your friends, or someone close to you. And the loss of this important relationship, such as maybe because of the death of someone, or maybe not death, but because that person has migrated to another place, causing you to have lesser time to really have interaction with each other. This cutting off of the relationship is very significant, and it plays an important role of why a person may feel depressed. Freud also believed that depression is simply due to an excessively superego. We learned in our basic psychology class that superego accounts for the conscience, for the morality. It tells us what is right and what is wrong, and it tries to demand itself by pushing us forward to do what is right and to always do what is right, to the point that when the superego predominates a person's life, the person may always feel over guilty and always strive for idealism and perfection. So therefore, the depressive phase occurs when the individual's superego or the conscience is dominant. So this means that if there's always striving for idealism, if there's always weighing out that, wait, is this right? Is this the right thing to do? Is this the right time to do it? So there's always the conscience that interplays. A healthy level of conscience is good. However, when it becomes too dominant, when it becomes too excessive, when it becomes too overpowered to the point that we try to really obey everything that the superego wants us to do, according to Freud, that can lead to a depressive phase. In contrast, the manic phase, which is the opposite of the depressive phase on the extreme, occurs when the individual's ego or rational mind asserts itself and he or she feels control. So here is the ego that has the say, right? But for the depressive phase, it is the superego. We learned that there are three parts of the psyche. We have the id, the ego, and the superego. The id focuses on the instincts and wants an immediate gratification. So this means that when we talk about id, the id just wanted to satisfy itself, and the only word that he knows is the word now. I want it now. I want to do it now. I don't want to do it tomorrow. I want to do it now. I want to satisfy every crave that I have now. So the id wanted to do everything that he wanted, and there's no waiting time for the id. Okay, but for the ego, you talk about the reality. It tries to balance out the id and the superego, and it tries to think about the reality of the situation. The superego talks about morality, as we mentioned, and so the id wants, I want it now, but the ego said, I need to do a bit of planning to get it. All right, but the superego says, you cannot have it. It's not right. So there's again the play of the conscience of a person of what is right. You cannot do it because it is not right. You cannot do it because that's not that's not the ideal thing to do. The society will judge you for doing it. The society wanted you to behave this way because this is the most acceptable behavior. So the superego tries to dominate. And so here is a very familiar picture, which is the picture of an iceberg, which shows to us how the three parts of the psyche would interplay. And the superego, which talks about the ideals and the morals, again, according to Freud, if it predominates in a person's life, it may lead to a depressive phase. And that will further exacerbate the depression as the superego continues to grow and overpower other parts of the psyche. The second perspective is the learned helplessness theory by Martin Seligman. Seligman, in early 1965, psychologist Martin Seligman and his colleagues accidentally discovered an unexpected circumstance related to human depression. They were studying the relationship between fear and learning in dogs. So in this experiment, now they have found out that a dog put into a partition cage learns to escape when the floor is electrified. So of course, kapag merong electricity, that will cause too much pain, right? Too much fear. And so the natural response will be to escape from it. We don't want the feelings of fear, right? We don't want the feelings of being terrified or being in pain because of electricity, right? So similar with other life, like for example, the life of a dog, no? The dog wants to protect its life. So that means the dog wants to escape, no, when the floor is electrified. However, if the dog is restrained, no, whilst being shocked, it eventually stops trying to escape. So why is it so? So as you can understand in this figure, here we can see that as the dog is restrained, no, from the shock, no, eventually the mind was conditioned that even though the restraint was removed already, no, tinanggal na nila yung restraint, but still, when the shock happens, instead of escaping, even though the door is already open, the dog can escape the cage, but the dog has learned to be helpless. The dog has learned to be helpless. That the dog felt na parang wala na, there's no way out. Even though the door is open, but the mind of the dog was conditioned that there's no way out. Why try to escape? I have a restraint. Well, in fact, the restraint was already removed, no? Tinanggal na ng no experimenter, right? Yung pinaka-restraint, but still the dog felt so afraid to the point na he doesn't want to escape. Now, Seligman and his colleagues have found out that similar can be also true among people. People who have experienced so much depression in life, so much pain in life, so much electricity in life, to the point that people may feel so depressed that they have felt that there's no way out, that they have felt stuck, right? Sometimes you will hear other people will say, Doc, hindi ko na alam kung anong gagawin because I felt stuck na parang wala na, there's no way out, there's no solution already. Sobrang dami ng problema na hindi ko na kaya, hindi ko na alam kung anong gagawin. I felt stuck. So, in my experience also, I have seen some patients who have developed this kind of thing called learned helplessness. They felt that there's no way out, and because of that thinking that they are helpless or they are hopeless, that tends to exacerbate the depressive phase. Another perspective is the cognitive model of depression by Aaron Beck. Beck in 1967 identified that there are three important mechanisms that he thought were responsible for depression. First is the cognitive triad. The second is the negative self-schemas. The third would be the faulty information processing. Let's look at them one by one. First is the cognitive triad. Okay, Beck believes that the cognitive triad is composed of negative views about the world. That's number one. Number two is the negative views about yourself. And number three is the negative views about the future. Examples of this would be a person may say to himself that nobody likes or cares about what I do. So why do it anyway? Because nobody likes or cares about it naman. And sometimes the patient may also have a negative view about himself and he may say, I'm not good at doing anything. Or a negative view about the future wherein a patient may say, I'm never going to be successful. So these statements were usually found among patients who are depressed. No? They tend to predominate with a negative view about the world, about what's happening about COVID, that they felt that they will not survive if in case they will have COVID-19. So they feel that the world is so negative and they kept on thinking about negative things and they don't focus on what is good, but rather they just dwell on the negative things about the world around them, and they have negative view about themselves, like just like we mentioned, that they will never survive, and negative view about the future, that they will not be able to cope with it in case they were diagnosed with COVID-19. So this kind of anxiety and fear has further caused a lot of not only anxiety but also depression on other patients. The second point that Beck would like to share is that the negative self-schemas. So what are this? Negative self-schemas are actually set of beliefs and expectations that people have about themselves that are essentially negative and pessimistic. Beck believed that depression-prone individuals develop a negative self-schema, and he claimed that negative schemas may be acquired in childhood as a result of a traumatic event. So he also said that these traumatic events could be the death of a parent or a sibling, parental rejection, criticism, overprotection, neglect or abuse, bullying at school, or exclusion from peer group. Now, as you have noticed in these examples, you may say that all of them are negative, right? But did you notice the word overprotection in this part? That sometimes when a child has grown in the environment wherein parents are overprotective of their children to the point that the child was not able to really grow his character and be able to accept and realize that the real world is not perfect, because he is always protected. Once he encountered a situation wherein he feels unprotected, that there's no way out, the person may feel easily having that kind of negative self-schemas about himself. That's why moderation is the key, right? When we talk about overprotection, it's also important to see that children needs protection. Our students need protection. However, overprotection, letting them grow in an overprotected environment may also not be mentally healthy. And as we have seen in these examples, these are also traumatic events like the death of a significant other, like a parent or a sibling, or even rejections from one's parents, or being criticized by other people by how you say words, how you dress up, how you behave in the public, or how you say something. Sometimes not even saying something, you know. Sometimes may mga tao who will experience trauma not because they were verbally abused, but even though just small things, no, like the way they look in the mirror, they felt that parang someone had neglected them. That's why they look that way. So sometimes it's really a very varied, no, cause, no. As long as trauma sinks in, as long as for that person it is a trauma for him, that could also cause the development of negative self-schemas, which actually develop through time. The third point that Beck would like to share is the faulty information processing. So, what are these? These are actually illogical thought patterns that are self-defeating, meaning it doesn't serve its purpose. Initially, it may serve to cover up the pain and the depression, but eventually it will actually cause further depression. And it can cause great anxiety or depression for the individual. What are the examples of this? Number one is the selective abstraction, which means that the patient draws conclusions on the basis of just one of many elements of a situation. So this is similar to the social psychology term selective attention, wherein the patient may forget to look at the bigger picture, but instead focuses on just one single mistake or just one problem. No, the patient focuses on just one of the many elements that he or she should have focused. So instead of dwelling on the positive things that are happening in his life, the patient may always dwell on the negative and just selectively focusing his attention to those negative things rather. So second is the personalization. Okay, so for the personalization, the patient attributes personal responsibility for events which aren't under a person's control. So, ibig sabihin, may mga pagkakataon na even though it's not his fault, but the patient feels na hindi, it's my fault. Even though hindi niya na problema, even the problems of other people, he feels that he should be blamed, even with the smallest detail of the problems that other people may experience, the patient tries to blame himself. And that, of course, would lead to depression. Third is the magnification, wherein the patient makes a mountain out of a molehill, right? So very, very small problem, he makes it even bigger. To the point of view of other people, it may sound or look trivial, very small, pero for this patient, talagang napakalaking problema na yun. And he tries to even magnify that problem by sometimes dwelling on that, crying on that, even though the problem is just it's small from the normal perspective. But for a depressed patient, a small problem is a big problem. The fourth point is the minimization, wherein the patient downplays the importance of a positive thought, emotion, or event. So this means that if a person says, oh, you know what, you're good in arts, or you're very creative, or if a person says, you know what, you're very intelligent, I think you will go a long way. Or if a person says, you know what, I think you are really very talented, why not do audition for this competition? I think you will win because you're very talented and you're very gifted. But in spite of those positive comments, a depressed patient may downplay and may not even acknowledge that what you are saying is true. So in return, as an effect, no? Consequently, the patient may feel useless, inadequate, or even having feelings of failure. So, hindi sa kanya tumatalab yung mga positive comments na sinasabi ng ibang tao. The fifth one rather is the arbitrary inference, okay, wherein the patient draws conclusions when there is little or no evidence. So this is similar to jumping to conclusions wherein the patient may believe immediately of a certain thought, even though there's no sufficient basis, right? So the patient may feel that, oh, this is what they are telling about me, they are talking about me behind my back, they were saying that I'm this or like that, even though there's no sufficient evidence to say so. But the patient believes that all of those thoughts are true, but there is no basis. Okay, and then finally, another example is the overgeneralization, wherein the patient makes sweeping conclusions based on a single event. So, for example, if a patient is an achiever and suddenly, because of one subject, he failed and he got a low score and failed that subject. So instead of focusing or thinking about, you have good subjects left and you're good in other subjects, but the patient may overgeneralize that he is a failure or he cannot make it to the next semester. He will not continue anymore because he feels that this event defines who he is as a person, instead of focusing on other more important things. So just one single event can make a person depressed. The next perspective is the humanistic theory to depression by Abraham Maslow. Maslow believed that our needs are classified into a hierarchy, and that's why he showed it using a form of a pyramid. So Maslow believed that the basic needs that we have, which is the physiological needs, examples of which would be the need for sleep, the need to eat, the need for sex, and other biological and physiological needs. Maslow believed that these needs must be met first in order to go to the next need, which is the need for safety. And the need for safety must be satisfied in order to move and seek for the next need, which is the need for love and the need for sense of belongingness. And once satisfied, the patient can now move to the next need, which is to seek for the need for self-esteem. And the need for self-esteem, once satisfied, will lead to seeking for the need for self-actualization. According to Maslow, the most important of this is the need for self-actualization, which is achieving out potential. He also believed that self-actualizing human being has a meaningful life, and anything that blocks our striving to fulfill this need can be a cause of depression. So, from the perspective of Maslow, he believed that a self-actualized person has a meaningful life. So most likely, that person may have a very, very small or very, very little chance to feel depressed because he has a meaningful life. But for Maslow, you cannot achieve the self-actualization phase until such time that you have fully satisfied the physiological, safety, love, and belongingness, as well as the esteem needs. So he believed that you must first be able to satisfy the needs found in the base of the pyramid before you can move to the next. And very important to point out, he also pointed out that in the middle or in between of these needs, if you cannot satisfy physiological needs, that could eventually lead to depression. If you don't satisfy but rather, if you satisfy physiological needs but haven't satisfied the need for safety or the need for love and belongingness, you may feel depressed. That's why some people, if they feel nobody loves them, if they feel that they don't belong, that there's no sense of belongingness, they feel depressed. And because these needs are important, and it helps us to evaluate a patient, that this patient could be depressed because one or several of these needs presented by Maslow were not met by the patient. So from the psychological perspective, the final perspective or point of view is the chemical imbalance theory of depression, wherein this theory naman is known as the catecholamine, monoamine, or serotonin deficiency hypothesis. So ibig sabihin, kapag naman bumababa ang level ng catecholamine, like your epinephrine, your norepinephrine, pag bumaba ang mga yan, monoamine as well as serotonin, pag bumaba yan, they can also cause depression according to this hypothesis. And this was based on the chemical action of the first generation of antidepressants, which were discovered serendipitously and found to act on monoamine pathways to increase monoamine concentrations. Yun yung reason kung bakit some of the antidepressant medications nowadays have been focused on correcting the following hormones, no? The catecholamine, monoamine, as well as the serotonin. A very classic example would be the drugs under the SSRIs, or the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Now, these drugs block the reuptake of serotonin, which increases the amount present in the synapse and magnifies its effect. So this means that if you block the uptake of serotonin, you increase, no, the level of serotonin in the synapse, and that would cause, no, the prevention of its deficiency. Given that the hypothesis is if you're deficient in serotonin, most likely you will feel depressed. So from the perspective of the biological perspective, no, correcting this imbalance will lead to correcting depression as well. Another example is the dopamine deficit versus serotonin deficit, wherein this hypothesis believed that the deficiency in dopamine can actually lead to Parkinsonian-like symptoms like slowing of reaction, anergia, no, slowing of movements, no, rigidity, and also can cause anhedonia, which is defined as the loss of pleasure or interest to previously things that you found pleasurable. Okay, so if you have deficit in dopamine, then most likely you will have these symptoms. Another thing is the serotonin deficit, wherein if there is decrease in serotonin, then that could lead to OCD-like symptoms, no, obsessive compulsive behaviors, as well as impulsivity like committing suicide or even aggressive behaviors. So now we have discussed the details about the psychological perspective. So now let's move to the next perspective, which is the sociological perspective. Let's have first Theory of Alienation by Karl Marx. So Marx theorized that through the process of division of labor, and by the way, division of labor is actually the structural hallmark of capitalism, what happens is that work shifted from being an expression of one's creative capacity to being an activity that made him or her isolated from him or herself. So this means that Marx saw that the work of the industrialization as being the labor for the sake of production of things, not for the purpose of man or woman expressing his or her true nature. In other words, labor became the end and man or woman became the means. Work, which was once an outlet for self-expression and a sense of pride, now becomes an alien means toward meeting the economic goals of ruling class elites. So what does it mean? It means that before, you just do the work as a sense of creativity, that this is a product of my creativity, this is a product of my talents. But in the advent or in the onset of capitalism, people may rarely find satisfaction in work, primarily because one, they have this common goal of just meeting the goals of someone above them, of a ruling class elite, that they have found themselves already alienated from the product of their works. Like for example, if you're working in the factory of bread, or if you're working in the factory who makes clothes, sometimes because of the routinary things that you are doing, and because of the lack of passion, that you cannot find already the passion and the creativity because you are not acknowledged for the things that you are doing, you are not already feeling connected to the products of your labor, you felt alienated or estranged from it, you just work for the economic goals of the boss above you or the superior above you, and the consequence of that, if left untreated, the person may feel that I am alienated from this, and that will cause depression. So from the perspective of Marx, depression has something to do with the working class particularly, especially in a society where capitalism predominates. Another perspective from sociology is the stigma theory of depression by Irving Goffman. Goffman believed that social stigma is a severe social disapproval of a person because of a particular trait that indicates their deviance from social norms. So this means that the stigma stems actually by the society itself dictating that this is approve, this is disapprove. So if your behavior is not approved by the majority of people, and because of your particular trait, that could be considered as deviance. From the term in sociology, it's called deviant behavior, while in psychology, we call it abnormal behavior. But for sociology, the deviant behaviors actually stem from the disapproval of our own society. And this can return will lead to stigma, and that stigma, people internalize the negative stereotypes that others hold about them. So for example, people always label you as ugly. People always label you as someone who is not sufficient, someone who is not talented, not creative, not intelligent enough. So these negative stereotypes became part of your identity. And because you listen to those people, it became eventually part of yourself. And that stigma can cause also further depression on your part. So the person feels that he or she is stigmatized and acts in a way consistent with the stigmatization. So sinabi mo na ganito ako, so I will do this, okay? Sinabi mo na pangit, so papangatawanan niya na pangit siya. And sinabi mo na hindi siya magaling, na hindi siya matalino, the person will always do the things that will make him look that way because yun na yung kanya naging action or behavior because that's what he or she internalized already. So because of negative experiences with discrimination, people come to fear rejection. Ayaw na nilang ma-reject pa. And so because of that fear of rejection, they just wanted to conform to the society. Okay, just because of that fear na ayaw nilang ma-reject sila. That's why some people as well who considered themselves to be part of a community that is different from the society, they felt na the only way for them not to be rejected is just to let go of what they are feeling right now and just conform to everything that society wants them to be. So, from the perspective naman from anthropology, let's have the theory of cultural relativism. This is theorized by Franz Boas. He believed that our behavior, worldview, gender-based performances, sexual practices, and our conceptions of what is normal and deviant, acceptable and unacceptable, is actually constructed, acquired through enculturation rather than natural or biological means. So, Boas believed that depression is acquired. How? Through enculturation and not a product of natural or biological means. So for Boas, it's not the genetic. We cannot identify even a single gene for us to say that if you have inherited this gene A, B, C, D, E, you will develop depression later on in life. There's no such thing. Boas believed that there's really no genetic or biological explanations that could really explain why a person is depressed. So he believes about this cultural relativism. So ano nga ba itong cultural relativism? This is actually defined as inappropriate. No, it is inappropriate to use outside standards to judge behavior in a given society. So ibig sabihin, hindi natin pwedeng gamitin yung standards natin, yung ating mga paniniwala, yung ating kultura para sabihin na mali ang kultura ng ibang lipunan. So naniniwala si Boas that even our own biases, our own culture should not be used as a standard or as a ruler to measure if a certain society is doing what is right or wrong. So because of this, no, depression may also come from the differences in the enculturation that a person may experience or was able to have been exposed depending on how the society was able to shape his mind. All right. So finally, we have the theory of depression based on ethnomedicine. It focuses on the role of culture, perception, and context in shaping someone's physical and mental health. So here naman, pinapakita sa atin the difference between the individualist culture, which is usually a Western culture, versus a collectivist or the Eastern culture. Both culture may experience depression, but the cause would be different because the perspective from each culture is also different. For example, in Western culture, they always strive for individual success. They always think of my future or of the individual's future. Nuclear family is important, individual resources, liberated family. So case-to-case basis from other Western countries, they may have this sense of pride about themselves that they want to strive for individual recognition. However, for the Eastern culture, predominantly they strive for group success. They always think about our future, not just my future, but our future. And extended family is important for them. That's why in our culture in the Philippines, diba, we wanted to really incorporate everyone, no, included in our family, 'di ba? Tayo yung culture na ang tinatawag natin is kuya, ate, kahit hindi naman natin biologically kamag-anak, right? We call a stranger ate or we call a stranger kuya even though it's really not biologically part of our family. Ganun ka-extended ang ating culture. Ganun ka-extended ang Philippine culture that we really wanted to really treat other people even though not blood related, but we want to treat other people as like part of our family because we wanted to have extended family. So shared resources as well. We wanted to share what we have and conservative family. No, we practice conservative behavior, conservative ideas in comparison to other cultures. So to summarize, we have talked about the psychological perspective, wherein we have learned different theories and as well as sociological perspective and the anthropological perspective. So now that we have covered the basis of our discussion, let's now move to a deeper part of the topic, which is the prevention of suicidal behaviors due to pandemic sadness. So, according to the World Health Organization, close to 800,000 people die due to suicide every year, which is one person every 40 seconds. So, suicide is a global phenomenon and occurs throughout the lifespan, whether young or old, and it accounts for 1.4% of all deaths worldwide, making it the 18th leading cause of death in 2016. 79% of suicides occurred in low and middle income countries in 2016. Overall, suicide death predominates in males over females in a proportion of about 3:1. Suicide attempts tend to predominate in females over males. So here we can see that the problem in suicide is a global, it's a pandemic problem. I know we're facing COVID-19 right now because it's pandemic, but even before COVID-19 happened, there was an ongoing pandemic, and that is the pandemic of suicide. A lot of family members were not quite comfortable to talk about this. They feel ashamed to talk about a family member who committed suicide. They feel ashamed to talk about it in the media and even publicly. That's why a lot of people will try to really hide it. They don't want to inform or even share their lives that they have committed suicide before because they feel that it is a sign of weakness, especially in the Philippine culture, right? In the Philippine culture, when you talk about depression, people will say, oh, wala lang yan, parang nasa isip mo lang yan. Kasi naiisip ko At tapos ang sasabihin pang reply would be, kasi wag mong isipin. On a depressed patient, it's hard not to think about negative thoughts. In a depressed patient, it's hard to really think about positive thoughts. But for the Filipino culture, we just say na wala yan, kaya mo yan, nasa utak lang yan, nasa isip lang yan, o baka naman kulang ka lang sa faith, no? Dagdagan mo lang yung faith mo, mawawala na yung depression mo. Sometimes, even other people will try to discount helping these people because they feel na mababaw lang yan, na parang depression lang yan. That's the reason why, even in the Philippine setting, we can see that the suicide mortality rate is as follows: 3.20% in 2016, 3.30% in 2010, and 2.60% in 2005. So if sa biglang tingin, you may say that, oh, that's just a small number, right, of the total population. However, you must understand that what we are talking about here is the suicide mortality rate. So this means that it talks about the number of suicide deaths in a year per 100,000 population. So ibig sabihin, ito yung mga suicide na talagang hindi siya interrupted, hindi rin siya suicidal attempts, but rather these are actual deaths of patients who have committed suicide. So 3.20% in 2016, that's already a big number, right? So, what is suicide? The term suicide was coined in the 17th century, taken from the Latin sui, which means of oneself, and cades, which means murder. Suicide is defined as death resulting from intentional, self-injurious behavior associated with any intent to die as a result of the behavior. So, this means that it's very clear that there is really an intention to die on the part of the patient. Let's talk about the different types of self-injurious behavior. Ano ba yung iba't ibang klase nito? There are actually two types of self-injurious behavior. One is non-suicidal, wherein the patient has no intention to die. So, however, there's also the suicidal self-injurious behavior, wherein the patient has an intention to die. So, let's talk about the non-suicidal. On this part, the patient may commit non-suicidal, self-injurious behavior, examples of which would be cutting himself, no, lacerations, cutting himself, or burning his skin with cigarette, no. I have some patients where and they do that, and also head banging, trying to hurt themselves intentionally, like punching themselves, but there is no intention to die. However, the patient felt comfortable in doing that because they found relief in the tension, like an anger or depression or the tension that the patient feels internally, that he just wanted to really relieve that tension, but there is no intention to die. And the non-suicidal behaviors may also happen repetitively, almost every day or nearly every day. In contrast, suicidal self-injurious behavior means that the patient has an intention to die. So meron talaga siyang conscious decision na gusto niya talaga to really get out of this world. So ito yung mga example na talagang they are really serious about dying, and the intention to die was usually planned, pinagpaplanuhan, at meron talaga silang step-by-step process, no, sa kanilang kaisipan. And usually this happens once only in a lifetime, or rarely twice or thrice. Unlike the non-suicidal, which can occur almost every day or nearly every day, but suicidal self-injurious behavior usually occurs once in a lifetime or twice or thrice rarely. So the suicidal self-injurious behavior starts with preparatory acts, wherein the patient contemplates of the steps, of the location, of the methods of doing this. And once done, no, this can be divided also into three parts. You have the interrupted attempt, wherein this is a type of suicidal self-injurious behavior, wherein in the midst of committing suicide, somebody has really interrupted or tried to really block the execution of the suicide, and hence the suicide was not pushed through. However, for the suicide attempt, this means that the patient had already done. However, the patient survived and was able to live again after that suicidal situation. That's what we call a suicide attempt. However, this is different from the term suicide, which means that the patient had already died, no, from the situation. So that is very, very different from interrupted attempt and suicide attempt. According to Durkheim, he is actually a sociologist. He addresses the phenomenon of suicide and its social causes. He wrote a book entitled Suicide, a Study in Sociology, wherein Durkheim believed that suicide is applied to all cases of death resulting directly or indirectly from a positive or negative act of the victim, which he or she knows will produce this result. And furthermore, Durkheim believed that there are four different types of suicide. And the first is the anomic suicide, from the word anomy, which means alienation or being alienated or estranged from one society. Examples of which would be a person or people who have encountered a severe catastrophe like typhoon, earthquake, or even those like what we mentioned earlier about Karl Marx, the theory of alienation. The patient may felt the having this kind of alienation or estrangement leading to anomic suicide. So aside from this, there's the altruistic suicide, which means that these are examples like people who are suicide bombers, no, people who join a religious group and sadly the leader has influenced their minds and brainwashed their minds that led to committing suicide. Egoistic suicide, this is a type of suicide due to, for example, having financial loss or even being diagnosed with terminal illness. Or let me emphasize, not just terminal illness but also chronic illnesses, because there are illnesses na wala pang cure but there's only treatment. No? There are illnesses wherein can be considered as chronic, meaning tumatagal siya, and because pabalik-balik no recurring pain, that can also cause too much sadness that eventually can lead to depression, and depression when left untreated can eventually lead to suicide. So another example is the fatalistic suicide, wherein common ito sa mga prisoners, wherein they have felt that there's no hope, that there's already life sentence of being imprisoned, so they just commit suicide, and that is what we call as fatalistic suicide. So now that we have discussed the different types, let's go to what is suicidal ideation. In the 1970s, the definition of suicidal ideation included intent to act or any intent to act on suicidal thoughts or carry out suicidal plans. So essentially, suicidal ideation was described as having thoughts, ideas, and intentions about suicide and plans and wishes to commit suicide. So basically, dalawang klase siya, no? Suicidal thoughts versus suicidal plans. And to make it more understandable, I would like to share that there are two phases of suicide. One is passive and the other one is active. So Doc, ano ba yung difference nitong dalawang ito? So yung passive phase of suicide, this means that naiisip ng pasyente na mag-suicide pero paminsan-minsan lang, no? There are times na nawawala, there are times na nandyan, pero not all the time, no? May mga times na naisip niya, ano kaya kung gawin ko ito, pero hindi naman palagi, hindi naman araw-araw. However, there's the active phase, which means that the patient is already contemplating about committing suicide step by step. No, the patient is already thinking, ano kayang gagawin ko pag ganitong step, ganitong lugar, saang lugar, anong oras, ano kayang gagamitin ko para maituloy itong ganitong plano. So meron na siyang iniisip na talagang active phase na everyday, hindi na ito yung paminsan-minsan but rather everyday naiisip niya itong gawin. And just to share with you, to our dear listeners this morning, you have to know that the active phase of suicide is a medical emergency. Ulitin ko po, the active phase of suicide is a medical emergency. Ibig sabihin, kung meron ka ng yan, kung nararanasan mo na yan, na araw-araw na lang sa buhay mo, naiisip mo ang suicide, then more importantly, you have to seek consult. You have to seek professional help. Now, for the passive phase, I'm not saying you don't need a professional help, because a passive phase of suicide, eventually, if left untreated, can lead to the active phase. Kaya dapat, kung nandito ka pa lang sa passive phase ng suicide, you have to seek consult kaagad para hindi na siya lumala at hindi na humantong pa sa active phase. Okay? Now, again, the passive suicidal ideation is a desire rather than a plan. No? It is usually elicited by questions such as, would you take precautions to save your life? Would you leave life or death to chance? Would you avoid steps necessary to save or maintain life? However, for the active phase, yan na yung merong plano, no? Meron talagang pag-iisip na step by step, alam niya na yung gagawin. Anytime pag na-trigger siya, ito na yung gagawin niya. The active phase is a plan to make an active suicide attempt, and when it comes to severity, the active ideation is considered more severe than passive ideation. So mas grabe siya, no? That's why I said earlier that the active phase is a medical emergency. So now let's go to the protective factors. Ano yung mga pwede nating gawin to protect ourselves, to shield ourselves, no, in relation to protecting ourselves na huwag tayong humantong to suicidal behavior. So number one is the cognitive style and personality. Now, studies have shown that if you have a sense of personal value, if you have a confidence in yourself, if you are seeking help when in difficulty, ibig sabihin, pa nakakaproblema ka, hindi mo sinasarili ang problema. You try to reach out to other people, hindi mo siya sinasarili. You seek advice when facing important choices. You don't just make choices out of a whim. You seek counselors, you seek advice from knowledgeable people, and you have openness to others' experiences and solutions. So that means you have a teachable heart, no? You have a heart of humility to learn from other people's experiences. Also, openness to learning. You wanted to really learn from others. Ability to communicate, no? You have to say it, no? You have to really verbalize it. No matter how you feel na, Dok, kasi nakakahiya naman eh. Kasi Dok, parang nakakahiyang magsabi ng problema sa iba. Baka hindi nila ako maintindihan. And because of that fear and because of that shame na parang we feel na hindi nila maiintindihan, the problem got worse, no? Lalong lumalala ang problema because you don't want to open to others. That's why the first step to recovery, to depression, is the willingness to trust someone. The willingness to trust someone whom you can hold accountable with, wherein you can share everything about yourself without hesitations, without restrictions, without thinking na I might be judged. Alright? So sana yun ang i-goal natin. Makahanap tayo ng support system to protect ourselves against suicidal behaviors. The second one is the family patterns. No? Studies have shown that if you have good family relationships, if you got support from a family, if you have devoted and consistent parents, most likely that the depression will not be able to linger, right? Because you have a support system. That's why if you have your own family with you, that's good. And I hope and pray that they are also supportive for you, that you are open to them. Pag may problema, you can tell them. Pero kung hindi ka open sa pamilya mo, I hope you can have your own set of family, what we call as the extended family, na tinuturing mo ding pamilya. Ang mahirap kung wala kang pamilya na tinuturing because you cannot go on yourself alone. No man is an island. I know it's a cliche to say no man is an island, but it's very true. You need someone to help you. You cannot deal that problem by yourself. You need to reach out and ask help from someone who is really trustworthy and someone who can really understand you. And then the third one is the cultural and social factors, like examples of which would be adherence to positive values, adherence to norms and traditions. As I said earlier, di ba, from the sociological perspective, sometimes yung pag-conform sa society can help that way, no, para ma-prevent yung ganitong mga depression. But sometimes it can also be the other way around, kaya we also have to be careful. And second is the good relations with friends, colleagues, and neighbors, support from relevant people, non-drug using friends, social integration through work, church activities, sports, and clubs. That's why membership to these organizations is also very important. And also a sense of purpose in life, the sense of meaning in life. Like what Maslow said, no, if you are a self-actualized person, you have meaning in life. You have reached your purpose in life. And finally, would be the environmental factors, no? Examples would be the good diet, the good sleep, no? Pag hindi ka nakakatulog ng maayos, that could further exacerbate, no, depression. Although difficulty in sleeping and the lack of sleep and even oversleep can be a manifestation of depression. It may also worsen the existing depression that a patient has. Third one is sunlight. No? Studies have shown that being exposed to the sun, having sunlight exposure can also help the mood, right? That's why people who live in northern countries, those cities that are not reached by the sun, na parang ang hirap makahanap ng sunlight, studies have shown that people there tend to be more depressed than those people who live in sunny areas. That's why if you got the chance, lalo na ngayon pandemic, it's hard to go outside. Pero if you have a balcony or if you have a gate sa labas na hindi ka naman kailangan lumayo, try mong magpa-araw because having sunlight can really help elevate your mood. Okay? And of course, very importantly, no, talagang alam natin, physical exercise can help, no, to regulate our mood, as well as non-drug and non-smoking environment. If you are smoking, try to quit smoking. If you are into drugs, you have to quit using drugs. And those harmful drugs, no, kailangan mag-quit in order to protect ourselves from suicidal behaviors. Very important. Now, let me share to you this very important story as well from the scriptures, from the story of a prophet by the name of Elijah. So, Elijah is a famous prophet wherein people may think na, oh, propeta yan. So, strong ang faith niyan, malakas ang pananampalataya, no? A very respected man, very faithful, and a man who is very strong. Pero, still, kahit prophet, tinatamaan din pala ng depression and to the point of even having suicidal ideations, no? Let's take a look at this story shortly. Verse 4, it says here that, but Elijah himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And Elijah prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. Then Elijah looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Verse 7, and the angel of the Lord came back the second time and touched Elijah and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too much or too great for you. So Elijah arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights, as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. So what can we learn from this short story from the scripture? We have learned, number one, that prophets and even leaders are not exempted from depression. Sometimes you may feel that you are strong enough because you're a leader. Maybe you're a teacher, you're an educator, or you're a head of the family, you're a mother, a father, or maybe you're a leader of a certain organization, and then you think that, why should I feel depressed? I'm a leader, I'm a strong person. But even leaders, even prophets, are not exempted from depression. And to that extent, Elijah had been also having suicidal thoughts during that time, if not for the miracle that an angel came and, if I may use the term, cook for Elijah, bake the bread for Elijah, prepared the drink for Elijah, he could have been gone, right? But because someone someone took time to really show that he or she cares, and that is the form of the angel in the story, Elijah regained strength and he was able to have the journey 40 days and 40 nights without being depressed anymore. So ano yung learned lesson dito? Correlating with the psychological perspective from Maslow, physiological needs are important. If you're a type of person who always tried to depress yourself by depriving yourself from food, no? Lalo na ngayon sa mga kabataan, nauso yung intermittent fasting, nauso yung hindi ka kumakain, nauso yung you deprive yourself of the food that you want. I'm not against fasting, no? I'm not against dieting, but what I'm saying is that if you are already depressed and you keep on doing these things and now you feel even more depressed, you try to analyze, maybe I should try to meet my physiological needs. Maybe I need to eat more muna. I need to spend time for myself, na mahalin ko naman ang sarili ko. Kumain naman ako sa oras, na wag akong malipasan ng gutom. Kainin ko yung mga paborito ko. Like for me, I really like this one. Ayan, nakikita niyo siguro sa screen. Toasted cashew nuts. Ayan. So, yan yung isa sa mga favorite ko aside from the hopya, yan yung mga favorite kong pagkain, you know. So yan yung mga comfort food natin na sometimes nakakalimutan natin dahil sa sobrang busy natin sa trabaho, and sometimes because of our own negligence, because we are overworked, no, workaholic people tend to forget, no, eating on time, and sometimes because of that a person can feel depressed. So a very difficult problem can sometimes be resolved by just a simple answer. And that answer is just to eat, to drink, to rest, to get enough sleep, and tomorrow is another day. And let's have hope that if we do this, no, one of the keys that we can learn from here is that we could be an angel to someone else's life. We can prepare a food for them. We can prepare a drink, no, a nutritious drink for them. We can do the grocery for them and buy them foods that they want so that they can eat well and feel that someone loves them and that they are valuable, that they are important. Because you will never think about suicide if you have that sense of importance to others, that you are important to me, so you should never commit suicide because I value your life and I am here to help you out and to really provide the best care that I could give, just like what the angel did. That's why the lesson for this story is that you could be an angel to someone's life who is already endangered, na parang konti na lang, konting-konti na lang, yung parang bibingo na. Kumbaga sa mga napapanood natin na, ako konting-konti na lang bingo na ako, parang give up na ako, susuko na ako. But because you are there, you became an angel to someone, napigilan yung ganong klaseng ideologies or yung ganong klaseng pag-iisip. And it's very important that if an angel can do that, then why not us, di ba? We have hands to prepare food, we have hands to do groceries, we have the means to help someone, why not do it, right? It's not an excuse naman din na ako din kasi depressed or ako din kasi may problema. Sometimes, helping others can relieve your own personal depression. Sometimes, helping others can also help you feel na dapat pala hindi ako malungkot kasi meron pa ring mga tao na mas nangangailangan kaysa sa akin. And I need to be there for them. I need to be an angel for them so that they won't have this kind of suicidal ideations. And it was really a very good behavior na ginawa ng angel, that the angel was able to help Elijah in this very crucial moment, no? How many lives could have been saved kung sana meron lang taong tumulong dun sa taong nadidepress, kung sana meron lang tao na nag-reach out and said that I care for you and I will give time for you, let's talk about this, I feel that you need help and I feel that I can help you. So yung mga ganong bagay, and I hope sana through this lecture you were able to have learned not only the theories but also the importance of being an angel to someone else's life. So what are the ways that we can do to have suicide prevention? Number one, we need to restrict access to lethal means. So ibig sabihin, kailangan medyo ingatan natin. Kung alam natin na suicidal na yung kaibigan natin, huwag nating hayaan na mapag-isa at huwag nating hayaan na nandyan lang at within his reach yung mga harmful methods, no, or yung mga harmful objects that he can use like knife, guns, or rope, no, na pwede niyang gamitin to commit suicide. So mas mahalaga na itago natin, ilayo natin yung mga harmful methods, no, yung mga harmful objects na pwede niyang gamitin as methods to commit suicide. So very important to really restrict the access of the person to these objects. The second one is the crisis hotline. So ito naman very important na meron kang matatawagan. That's why even in the school, that even in the community organizations where we are part of, kailangan nagsasuggest tayo ng mga numbers, mga hotlines na pwede nilang tawagan sa oras na nangangailangan sila ng kausap or ng tulong. The third one is public education about suicide, just like what we are doing right now this morning. We're talking about the reality that suicide is a big problem. Like, for example, in Japan, the suicide rate in rural areas in Japan was reduced by 50% after a community-based intervention emphasizing public awareness of the problem of suicide, health promotion initiatives, programs designed to promote a sense of purpose among senior citizens dahil nakita nila na very common ang suicide among senior citizens on their country, like the middle age and the senior citizens were the primary focus of the intervention efforts and creation of a community network. So now that we are done with the prevention of suicidal behaviors, now let's go to the final topic or the final part of this discussion, which is what are the causes and remedies of pandemic sadness. Let's start with the first cause of pandemic sadness, which is the lack of sense of belongingness secondary to isolation. During this pandemic, marami sa atin hindi nakakalabas, natatakot lumabas dahil baka mahawa ng COVID-19. And because of this isolation, some people felt na I cannot do this anymore. I cannot handle this isolation anymore. Na parang feeling nila they will become crazy already because of this ongoing pandemic. And as echoed in Genesis 2 verse 18, it says here, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. So even a man, it's not good for us to be alone. We need someone to help us. And so even in life, isolation is really a big cause of pandemic sadness. Now, what is the remedy to this? We have to reconnect and stay connected. Reconnect with your parents if still available. Reconnect with your friends. Reconnect with your hobbies and previous likes. Reconnect with God. No? Very important we found ourselves holistically, that we need to acknowledge that we cannot do this on our own. We need to reconnect with other people because we are social creatures and we need to really bond with others. I'm not saying that we don't do social distancing. I'm not saying that. We have to practice social distancing, but we have to also acknowledge the importance of people around us. So if you cannot communicate with them physically, please utilize the power of technology. Communicate via call, communicate via Zoom, via other methods of communication that you can do so that you can reach out to those people and reconnect. And also reconnect with your creator. You need to help spiritual health as well, that you need to reconnect yourselves with your God. No, very important. The second cause of pandemic sadness is too much idealism and perfection, secondary to predominance of the superego. We have mentioned a while ago that superego is the conscience, right? Talks about the morality of what is right and wrong. However, if having a healthy level of superego or the morality of what is right and wrong is good. However, excessive superego, excessive conscience can lead to over guilt and over depression. And according to Freud, as what we mentioned, Freud believed that this is the cause of why there's pandemic sadness. No? People felt as well that they have to achieve these things, they have plans to do, they have to be perfect, they have to achieve this and this at a certain date, pero hindi nila ma-achieve because of the restrictions of lockdown, because of the restrictions of pandemic. They cannot achieve their previous plans because of the pandemic. And because of that, it has led to pandemic sadness and eventually depression. So what is the solution to this, or the remedy? The remedy is that we need to live our lives on the basis of contentment. And as we all know, contentment is such a rare character to find in this world where fame and perfection were often applauded and likewise glorified. Diba kapag nakikita mo sa media, when you see people from Facebook, na parang ang perfect naman ang buhay nila. I remember I have a friend na parang she felt so depressed because a lot of her friends are getting engaged already. Tapos siya hindi pa engaged, na parang naku, lalampas na ako sa kalendaryo. And who among you, among our viewers today, sa mga nakikinig sa atin dyan, na sino sa inyo yung may ganyang thoughts din na parang naku, lagpas na ako sa kalendaryo, or naku, wala pa rin akong jowa, yung mga kaibigan ko may jowa na. So parang natatakot ka for yourself na baka tumanda kang mag-isa. But here we can see that the root cause of depression is always looking at other people, no, comparing yourself with other people, which could further worsen the depression. And the very important solution for that is to learn the importance of having contentment. The spirit of contentment is not easy to find. It's actually rare nowadays because people will always try to strive for so many things, achieve so many things, to the point that they have forgotten the importance of contentment. Na hindi naman kailangan ng napakaraming bagay sa buhay para maging masaya. Na hindi naman kailangan ng napakaraming tao sa buhay para maging masaya. Sometimes, a few people by your side, a few things with you will already make you feel happy. Na hindi naman kailangan sobrang dami ang kailangan sa buhay. Contentment, as defined by a quotation, is that to be content doesn't mean you don't desire more. It means you're thankful for what you have and patient for what's to come. Hindi masama maghangad, hindi masama na magkaroon ng goal sa buhay. Subalit, kailangan nating tanggapin ang sitwasyon natin ngayon, lalo na ngayong pandemic, and we need to learn how to be content sa panahon ngayon, no? How to be happy and how to have contentment na may mga plano tayong hindi pwedeng gawin dahil sa restriction sa lockdown. Pero kailangan pa rin nating matutunan na maging masaya kahit na may mga plano na hindi matutupad sa taon na ito. Contentment is not by addition but by subtraction. Seeking to add a thing will not bring contentment. Instead, subtracting from your desires until you are satisfied only with Christ brings contentment. So, for those listeners no, na nakikinig sa atin right now, maybe you're wondering why we also talk about spirituality, because we have learned how important holistic approach could be. Na hindi mo lang tinitreat ang patient from a physical perspective. You don't just auscultate the patient. You don't just evaluate the patient based on their physical diseases, but you look at their emotional state. You look at their mental state. You look at their spiritual state, because all of those things are interconnected and all of those things are important. No? So, pinapakita natin dito na talagang sa buhay na ito, we need to learn the importance of having the spirit of contentment, because that's a big step towards the recovery from depression. No? Para maging masaya, matuto na maging kontento kung ano ang meron sa ngayon at matutong tanggapin kung ano ang meron sa ngayon at maging mapagpasalamat. Sabi nga, count your blessings. Because kapag hindi mo binilang ang blessings mo, sometimes you may feel depressed. But if you have realized and if you have learned the importance of counting your blessings, marirealize mo na hindi naman pala ako dapat ma-depress. Na marami palang bagay na dapat akong ipagpasalamat. Yes, it's true. May mga problema, may mga challenges. Pero isipin mo rin may mga blessings na dumating sa buhay mo na huwag mo naman sanang kalimutan na ipagpasalamat. And then finally, the final cause of pandemic sadness is overwhelmed by hopelessness secondary to learned helplessness. Ito yung sinabi ni Martin Seligman kanina, na because of the learned helplessness, na ang feeling natin wala nang way out. No, I have heard some of my patients would tell me, Doc, the reason why I feel depressed kasi I feel stuck. Have you experienced that? Na parang na-stuck ka na, so parang wala ka nang makitang solusyon sa buhay. Na parang you have felt stuck, so there's no way out, parang you felt there's no escape. But it's not true. No, hindi yun totoo. Meron pa ring way out, meron pa ring solusyon sa bawat problema, at ang kailangan mong gawin is ma-overcome yung feelings of learned helplessness. And again, you cannot overcome this by yourself. You need to reach out to others. You need to seek help from professionals for us to help you also, and you don't need to go through these problems alone. No, we are here to help, and we would like to extend our time, our effort to help you recover from depression. So what is the remedy for this? You need to let go of things that are beyond your control. So sometimes, sa kagustuhan natin to always be in control of our lives, no, we forget the importance of resting, na magpahinga din. Sabi nga, when you always take the driver's seat, you assume the big responsibility, and soon you will be tired of constant driving. But if you let go and park for a while to rest, wisdom may flow. And that is very important, no? Na sometimes drive ka ng drive, no? Maneho ka ng maneho, you have forgotten na magpahinga. At sana ma-realize natin na sa buhay, we also need to rest, no? Because rest is not a sign of weakness, it is actually a sign of strength. Na kailangan din matutunan natin to recharge, na magpahinga. Kaya nga napakaganda, no, nung salitang Tagalog, no, sa atin na sinabing pahinga. From the word pahinga, nandun yung salitang hinga, which means to breathe, no? And napakaganda because kapag tayo nagpapahinga, natututunan natin na huminga, to give ourselves time to breathe and to give ourselves time to relax, to unwind, to give ourselves chance to really release all of the negativities and unload all of the burdens off our shoulders and try to be more comfortable resting and regaining strength. Sabi nga, it's a cliche, but again, it's very true. Let go and let God, no? Sometimes kaya tayo nababurden, kaya tayo nadidepress because we try to shoulder all problems by ourselves, no? Sinasarili natin. When in fact, hindi mo siya dapat sarilinin. You need to let go and let God, no? Reconnect with God, reconnect with other people, reconnect with your family members, and also, if I may add also, na very important na matutunan din natin as part of rest, kasi hindi tayo mapapahinga, no? kung wala itong bagay na ito. Very important itong bagay na ito matutunan natin, and that is the word forgiveness. Kailangan nating matutong magpatawad, no? Because forgiveness will allow us to have rest. Na ang hirap kayang magpahinga kung marami kang hindi napapatawad, kung marami kang sama ng loob, no? Napakahirap magpahinga. Sabi nga, you may feel rested physically, but how about emotionally, no? Pwedeng nakahiga ka sa pinakamalambot na kama sa buong mundo, pero still, you don't feel comfortable. Why? Because you haven't learned how to forgive. You haven't learned either how to forgive yourself of the past mistakes. Maybe you haven't forgive someone of the hurting behaviors that they have done to you, or the hurting words that they have told you or talk about you behind your back. Maybe you have forgotten to forgive someone, or maybe you have forgotten to forgive yourself. So I hope through this lecture forum you were able to have an open eyes that the importance of forgiveness should be there, the importance of contentment should be there, that I need to accept my situation right now, but it doesn't mean that it will not change, but I just have to accept things as they are, and I know that recovery is possible. Hope is possible, recovery is possible. I don't need to go on through these problems alone. I can find someone to help me. I will not be afraid. I will not be hesitant to share what I'm going through, because I know I have found someone or some people who are trustworthy whom I can share my problems with. So sana po itong lecture forum na ito ay nakatulong sa mga nakikinig sa atin right now. I know we are very far, no, miles apart from each other, but I pray that this technology, through the power of technology, this message also has reached you clearly, and through the power of the message that we have tackled this morning, I hope somehow nabawasan yung depression, and hopefully sana natutunan natin yung mga strategies, no, yung mga skills na pwede natin gawin, yung mga remedies na natutunan natin, ma-apply natin sa ating personal life, so that this can help you alleviate, no, and totally hopefully matanggal na yung mga depression na meron tayo sa araw na ito. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening carefully to this lecture forum. I know this is a very important topic in this time of pandemic, and I hope that this topic has helped you effectively. And if you need someone to talk with, nandito rin ako as a doctor, and I hope that I can help you soon. And don't be afraid to reach out, because you can do this with the help of other people as you reconnect with your spirituality and with people around you. Nothing shall be impossible. Recovery is on the way, and we're looking forward to hear from you soon. So thank you so much, and have a great day. God bless.